The sun rose over the palace of Zazura, painting the carved cedar screens with gold. Aaliyah awoke in the dim servants' quarters, the straw mattress rustling beneath her. She moved carefully, a small bundle nestled close to her chest. Beneath a worn shawl, a newborn infant slept soundly. Aaliyah's heart swelled with a love so fierce it frightened her. This tiny life hidden from the world was her secret, her joy, and her burden. She rose quietly, dressing in her plain servant's garb. The baby stirred, and Aaliyah hushed him with a soft lullaby. She must be quick. The other servants would soon be awake, and she had to perform her duties before anyone noticed her precious cargo. Aaliyah's days were long and filled with endless tasks. She swept the vast mosaic-tiled floors of the royal court, polished the gleaming brass lamps that hung from the high ceilings, and arranged fresh flowers in crystal vases. She moved with a quiet grace, her gentle hands tending to every detail. No task was too small, no chore too tedious. She was known throughout the palace for her diligence and her sweet, unassuming nature. The palace was a world of contrasts. The royal quarters were filled with ornate furniture, silk tapestries, and the scent of exotic perfumes. The servants' hall, however, was a cramped and dimly lit space where whispers traveled like smoke and dreams were often deferred. Aaliyah navigated both worlds, her heart always heavy with the secret she carried. During her breaks, she would steal away to a hidden alcove behind the kitchens, where she could nurse her baby and whisper loving words. The fear of discovery was a constant shadow, but the sight of her child's peaceful face gave her strength. She knew she could not hide him forever, but for now, this small, secret world was all they had. As the day wore on, the palace buzzed with activity. Noblemen in fine robes strolled through the courtyards, their voices echoing through the marble halls. Servants hurried back and forth, carrying trays laden with food and drink. Amidst the bustling activity, Aaliyah moved like a ghost, her secret safely tucked away beneath her shawl. Each stolen moment with her child, each soft lullaby, was a prayer for a future she dared not imagine. Prince Firuz, heir to the throne of Zazura, began his day with the customary prayers in the royal mosque. He listened attentively to the imam's words, his handsome face serene. Firuz was known for his fairness and his unwavering adherence to the ancient laws of the kingdom. He believed in justice and compassion, but he was also young and somewhat naive, his worldview shaped by the cloistered life within the palace walls. After prayers, Firuz met with his advisors in the Grand Council chamber. They discussed matters of state, from trade agreements to the ongoing drought that plagued the southern provinces. Firuz listened patiently to each advisor's opinion, weighing their words carefully before making a decision. He ruled with a steady hand, always striving to do what was best for his people. Later that morning, Firuz walked through the palace gardens, inspecting the meticulously manicured lawns and fragrant rose bushes. He paused by the fountain, watching the water cascade into the marble basin. He enjoyed these quiet moments, a brief respite from the pressures of his royal duties. Suddenly, a commotion broke out near the palace gates. Shrill voices echoed through the air, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Firuz turned to see Governess Nabila, his stern tutor, striding towards him, her face flushed with anger. She dragged a young woman behind her, her grip tight on the woman's arm. It was Aaliyah, the quiet maid who had served in the palace since childhood. Aaliyah's head was bowed, her face pale. She clutched a shawl tightly around her, her body trembling. Firuz felt a pang of concern. Aaliyah was known for her gentle nature and her unwavering loyalty to the royal household. What could she have done to warrant such harsh treatment from Nabila? "Your Highness," Nabila said, her voice sharp, "I have caught this girl in a flagrant violation of palace rules. She has brought shame upon this household." Firuz looked at Aliyah, his brow furrowed. "What is the meaning of this, Aliyah?" he asked gently. Aliyah lifted her head, her eyes filled with tears. "Please, Your Highness," she whispered, "don't cast me out." Nabila snorted. "She has been hiding a child, an illegitimate child, within these very walls. Such a blatant disregard for decency cannot be tolerated." Nabila ripped the shawl from Aliyah's arms, revealing a tiny infant nestled against her chest. The baby stirred, its small face peeking out from the swaddling clothes. Firuz stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the child. Then he froze. On the baby's tiny foot he saw a birthmark, a distinctive dragon-shaped mark, identical to the one his late brother, the former crown prince, had borne. The courtyard emptied quickly, leaving only Firuz, Aliyah, and the baby. Nabila, still fuming, had been dismissed with a wave of Firuz's hand. He led Aliyah to a small, private chamber off the main hall. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft gurgle of the infant. Firuz sat on a low divan, gesturing for Aliyah to sit opposite him. She hesitated, then settled carefully, still clutching the baby close. "Tell me the truth, Aliyah," Firuz said, his voice low and serious. "Whose child is this?" Aliyah looked down at the baby, her long lashes casting shadows on her cheeks. She remained silent, her lips pressed together in a thin line. "Aliyah," Firuz pressed, "that birthmark, it is the mark of my brother, the late crown prince. You must tell me everything." Aliyah's eyes flickered up to meet his. Fear and uncertainty clouded her gaze. "Your Highness," she whispered, I cannot say." Firuz studied her face, searching for answers. He saw no deceit in her eyes, only fear. He knew the strict laws of the kingdom regarding illegitimate children born within the palace walls. The punishment was severe, and he could not bear the thought of Aliyah and her child suffering such a fate. But he also had a duty to his family, to his kingdom. He needed to know the truth. "Aliyah," he said, his voice softening, "I promise you, no harm will come to you or the child, but I need to understand. Is this my brother's son?" Aliyah remained silent, tears welling in her eyes. She looked down at the baby, her hand gently stroking his soft cheek. The infant stirred, his tiny hand reaching up to grasp her finger. A silent understanding passed between mother and child, a bond so strong that words seemed unnecessary. Firuz watched them, his heart filled with a strange mixture of suspicion and compassion. He had always admired Aliyah's quiet strength and her unwavering dedication to her duties. He had never suspected she held such a secret that could potentially shake the very foundations of the royal family. He rose and walked over to the window, gazing out at the bustling city beyond the palace walls. He needed time to think, to process the information he had just received. The implications were enormous. If this child was indeed his brother's son, it could jeopardize his own claim to the throne. He turned back to Aliyah. "I will give you some time to consider your words," he said. "But understand, Aliyah, this cannot remain a secret forever. The truth will come out." Aliyah nodded, her eyes still downcast. She rose to leave, clutching the baby close. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back at Firuz. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a silent exchange of unspoken understanding. Then she was gone, leaving Firuz alone with his thoughts and the weight of a secret that threatened to change everything. Firuz spent the following days in quiet contemplation. The image of the baby, the unmistakable dragon birthmark, haunted his thoughts. He could not shake the feeling that Aliyah was hiding something important, something that connected to his late brother. Driven by a need to understand, Firuz began a discreet investigation into the Crown Prince's life. He requested access to his brother's private chambers, a request that raised eyebrows amongst the palace staff, but was ultimately granted. The room was just as his brother had left it, Books stacked haphazardly on the shelves, a half-finished tapestry draped over a chair, a lute resting against a wall. Firuz ran his hand over the smooth wood of the lute, remembering the melodies his brother used to play. He searched through drawers and cabinets, finding nothing of immediate significance. Then, tucked away in a small, locked chest, he discovered a collection of letters. Most were correspondence from foreign dignitaries and family members, but one, tied with a faded ribbon, was addressed simply to "My dearest Aliyah." Firuz's heart pounded in his chest. He carefully untied the ribbon and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably his brother's. The letter spoke of secret meetings, whispered promises, and a love that had blossomed in the shadows of the palace walls. It did not explicitly name a child, but the tone, the tenderness in the words, hinted at a deep and abiding affection for Aliyah. Meanwhile, Aliyah continued her duties, her heart heavy with worry. Every creak of the floorboards, every whispered conversation, sent a shiver of fear through her. She knew her secret was precarious, balanced on a knife's edge. She carried the baby constantly, swaddled close to her body, feeling his warmth against her skin. He was her constant companion, her source of strength, and her greatest vulnerability. She performed her tasks meticulously, her movements precise and efficient. She avoided eye contact, hoping to remain invisible amidst the bustle of the palace. She yearned to see her son safe, to escape the confines of the palace walls, but she knew she had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Firuz, armed with the newfound knowledge from the letter, began to observe Aliyah more closely. He noticed the subtle glances she cast towards the hidden alcove behind the kitchens, the way she hummed soft lullabies while polishing the silver, the gentle sway of her body as she moved through the halls. He saw the weariness in her eyes, the constant vigilance, the quiet strength that radiated from her despite her fear. One afternoon, as Aliyah was tending the royal gardens, Firuz approached her. He held out a small wooden toy, a carved bird that his brother had made years ago. "I found this amongst my brother's belongings," he said softly. "I thought perhaps the child might like it." Aliyah's eyes widened in surprise. She hesitated for a moment, then accepted the toy, her fingers brushing against Firuz's. A silent understanding passed between them, a shared concern for the innocent life they both held dear. The small gesture, a simple act of kindness, forged a bond between them, a bond that transcended the rigid hierarchy of the palace walls. The baby, oblivious to the weight of the secrets surrounding him, gurgled happily, his tiny hand reaching out to grasp the wooden bird. For a fleeting moment, the fear and uncertainty that had clouded their lives seemed to dissipate, replaced by a shared hope for a future where the truth could finally be revealed. Nabila paced Firuz's private study, her sharp words echoing off the high, vaulted ceiling. "Your Highness, your continued inaction is baffling. This woman, this servant girl, has brought shame upon the royal household. She must be banished, along with her bastard child. The longer you delay, the greater the scandal will become." Firuz sat at his desk, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. He listened to Nabila's tirade, his face impassive. He knew she was right, at least according to the strict laws of the palace. But something held him back. He could not shake the image of Aliyah's tearful face, the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, the fierce love she held for her child. And the birthmark, the undeniable mark of his brother, continued to nag at him. "I will address the matter, Nabila," Firuz said finally, his voice calm but firm, "but I will do so in my own time." Nabila's eyes narrowed. "Your Highness, your leniency is misplaced. This girl is manipulating you. She knows how to play on your compassion. Do not be fooled by her innocent act." Firuz dismissed Nabila with a wave of his hand. He needed to speak with Aliyah, to hear her story, to understand the truth behind the secrets she so carefully guarded. Later that evening, under the cloak of darkness, Firuz sent a trusted servant to summon Aliya to the abandoned rose garden behind the palace. The air was heavy with the scent of jasmine as Firuz waited, the moonlight casting long shadows across the overgrown pathways. He heard the rustle of silk and turned to see Aliya approaching, the baby cradled in her arms. "Your Highness," she whispered, her voice trembling. Firuz gestured for her to sit on a nearby stone bench. "Aliya," he began, his voice gentle, "I need to know the truth. Tell me about the child. Tell me about my brother." Aliya hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the darkened garden. "Your Highness," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the Crown Prince. He loved me. He promised to marry me, but he died before he could." Firuz listened intently, his gaze fixed on Aliya's face. He saw no sign of deceit, only pain and fear. "And the child?" he asked softly. Tears welled in Aliya's eyes. He is the Crown Prince's son, my son." She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small, silver locket. She opened it, revealing a miniature portrait of the late Crown Prince. "He gave me this," she said, her voice choked with emotion. He said he would always be with me." Firuz examined the locket, his heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and growing belief. He remembered his brother's gentle nature, his kind heart, his tendency to defy convention. It was not beyond the realm of possibility that he had fallen in love with a servant girl, that he had made promises he was unable to keep. He looked at Aliya, her face pale in the moonlight. He saw the exhaustion etched in her features, the fear that haunted her eyes. Yet he also saw a strength, a resilience that shone through the darkness. "Aliya," he said, his voice filled with conviction, "I believe you." A wave of relief washed over Aliya's face. She looked down at the baby, her hand gently stroking his soft cheek. The infant stirred, his tiny hand reaching up to grasp her finger. In that moment, a silent bond was forged between Firuz and Aliya, a bond of shared secrets and unspoken understanding. Firuz knew he had a difficult path ahead, a path fraught with danger and uncertainty, but he also knew, with a growing certainty, that he had to protect Aliya and her child, to defend the truth, no matter the cost. Nabila, her patience worn thin, decided to take matters into her own hands. Firuz's reluctance to banish Aliya and the child was, in her opinion, a weakness that threatened the stability of the royal household. She began a subtle campaign to undermine Aliya, whispering to other servants about the maid's loose morals and the shameful secret she carried. The whispers spread like wildfire through the servants' quarters, poisoning the once harmonious atmosphere. The other servants, fearful of Nabila's wrath and eager to curry favor, began to shun Aliya. They avoided her gaze, whispered behind their hands, and made snide remarks about her swollen belly, now barely concealed by her loose clothing. Aliya, already burdened by her secret, felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. She withdrew further into herself, her only solace the quiet moments she spent with her son. Nabila's poison also seeped into the royal court. She subtly hinted to the nobles about a scandalous affair involving a servant girl and the late Crown Prince, carefully avoiding any direct accusations against Firuz's brother, but creating an atmosphere of suspicion and unease. The courtiers, always eager for gossip and intrigue, began to speculate about the identity of the child and the potential threat to the line of succession. Firuz, isolated in his chambers, felt the pressure mounting. He received veiled warnings from advisers, concerned whispers from courtiers, and increasingly pointed questions from his own family members. He realized the precariousness of his position. His leniency towards Aliya, his willingness to believe her story, was being interpreted as weakness, as a disregard for the established order. He paced his study, the weight of the crown heavy on his head. He wanted to believe Alia, to trust the bond that had formed between them. But the constant whispers, the growing suspicion within the court, began to erode his confidence. He felt increasingly alone, trapped between his desire to do what was right and the overwhelming pressure to protect the reputation of the royal family. He knew he had to make a decision, to act decisively before the situation spiraled out of control. But each option presented a different kind of danger. If he banished Alia, he risked condemning an innocent child and the woman he believed to be telling the truth. If he acknowledged the child as his nephew, he risked a scandal that could destabilize the kingdom. Torn between his duty and his conscience, Firuz found himself increasingly isolated, adrift in a sea of doubt and uncertainty. The walls of the palace, once a symbol of security and tradition, now felt like a prison, closing in on him from all sides. Nabila found Firuz staring out at the city from his balcony, a deep frown etched on his brow. She approached him silently, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. "Your Highness," she began, her voice laced with concern. "You seem troubled. The whispers in the court are growing louder. They speak of your indecision, your leniency towards the servant girl Alia." Firuz turned, his gaze meeting Nabila's. "I am aware of the whispers, Nabila," he said, his voice weary, "but I still seek the truth." Nabila placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Your Highness, sometimes the truth is not what it appears to be. This girl, she is clever. She knows how to manipulate a kind heart like yours. She tells you stories of love and secret promises, preying on your compassion." "But the birthmark," Firuz began, his voice laced with doubt. Nabila shook her head. "A mere coincidence, Your Highness, a trick of nature. Such marks are not uncommon. Do not let sentimentality cloud your judgment. You have a duty to your kingdom, to your ancestors. You must protect the integrity of the throne," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Think of the scandal, Your Highness. Think of the damage this girl's lies could inflict upon the royal family. The people will lose faith in their ruler. Your enemies will seize upon this weakness. You cannot afford to be seen as indecisive, as swayed by a servant's fabricated tales." Firuz's brow furrowed deeper. Nabila's words resonated with him. He had been raised on stories of duty, of honor, of the unwavering responsibility of a ruler to his people. He had always strived to live up to those ideals. The thought of jeopardizing his kingdom, of bringing shame upon his family, filled him with dread. "What would you have me do, Nabila?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Banish her, Your Highness," Nabila said firmly. "Send her away, along with the child. Sever all ties. It is the only way to protect the throne, to restore order and silence the whispers." Firuz looked out at the city again, the lights twinkling in the distance. He thought of Alia, of her quiet strength, of the love he had seen in her eyes when she looked at her child. He thought of the birthmark, the undeniable resemblance to his brother. Doubt gnawed at him, a cold, insidious feeling that chipped away at his belief. He sighed, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. "Very well, Nabila," he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "It shall be done." From that day forward, Firuz distanced himself from Alia. He avoided her gaze, ignored her presence in the palace, and refused to acknowledge the existence of her child. He threw himself into his royal duties, attending endless meetings, reviewing countless documents, seeking refuge in the routine and formality of his position. He tried to convince himself that he was doing the right thing, that he was protecting his kingdom, but a nagging sense of guilt gnawed at his conscience. Alia, sensing the shift in Firuz's demeanor, felt her heart break. She had dared to hope, to believe that he would protect her, that he would see the truth in her story. Now, she realized she had been foolish. She was just a servant girl, insignificant in the grand scheme of the royal court. She watched from afar as Firuz withdrew, his face becoming increasingly distant, his eyes cold and unreadable. She felt a profound sense of loneliness, a chilling realization that she was truly alone in her struggle. The whispers of the other servants, once merely annoying, now cut like knives, each word a reminder of her isolation, her vulnerability. She clutched her child closer, his warmth the only comfort in a world that had grown increasingly cold and hostile. Nabila, emboldened by Firuz's apparent submission, wasted no time in solidifying her victory. She drafted an official edict, stamped with the royal seal, declaring Alia and her illegitimate child banished from the kingdom of Zazura. The edict was read aloud in the servants' hall, the words echoing through the hushed space. The other servants, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, stole glances at Alia, who stood motionless, her face pale, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. The edict stipulated that Alia was to leave the palace before sunrise the following morning. She was given a small pouch of coins, barely enough to sustain her for a few days, and a worn cloak to protect her from the elements. No provisions were made for the child. Nabila, her face a mask of cold satisfaction, watched as Alia received her meager belongings. Alia returned to her small room in the servants' quarters. She laid the baby on the straw mattress, her hands trembling as she gently stroked his soft cheek. Tears streamed down her face, silent and unrelenting. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, no future to look forward to. The world outside the palace walls was a vast and unknown territory, filled with dangers she could scarcely imagine. But as she looked at her son's peaceful face, a new resolve hardened within her. She would not let despair consume her. She would protect her child, no matter the cost. She would find a way to survive, to build a life for them, far away from the cruelty and intrigue of the palace. She gathered her few belongings, wrapping the baby securely in a shawl. She took one last look at the small room that had been her home for so many years, a bittersweet pang of nostalgia tugging at her heart. Then she turned and walked towards the door, her head held high, her steps firm and resolute. Firuz watched from his balcony as Alia emerged from the servants' entrance, her small figure silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. He saw the way she clutched the baby close, the determined set of her shoulders, the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. A wave of guilt washed over him, a cold, suffocating feeling that tightened his chest. He knew he had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. He had listened to the whispers, to the manipulative words of Nabila, and in doing so, he had betrayed the trust of a woman who had shown him nothing but loyalty and kindness. He wanted to call out to her, to stop her, to tell her that he believed her, that he would protect her. But the words caught in his throat, choked by the weight of his own indecision. He watched as Alia walked towards the palace gates, her figure growing smaller and smaller until she disappeared into the darkness beyond. He was left alone on the balcony, the cold morning air biting at his skin, the image of Alia's retreating figure seared into his memory. He knew he had to act, to rectify the wrong he had committed, but how? The question echoed in his mind, a tormenting reminder of his own failure. The whispers of the court, once so insistent, now faded into the background, replaced by the deafening silence of his own conscience. The rising sun cast long shadows across the dusty road as Alia walked, her baby sleeping soundly in her arms. The palace gates, once so familiar, now seemed like a distant memory. She had walked for hours, her legs aching, her stomach empty. The small pouch of coins she had been given was dwindling rapidly, and she had no idea where she was going, no plan for the future. Despair gnawed at her, a cold, insidious feeling that threatened to overwhelm her. Then a sudden memory flickered in her mind, a spark of hope in the gathering darkness. The letter the Crown Prince had given her, the one she had hidden so carefully, fearing its discovery. It was her only proof, her only hope of clearing her name and securing a future for her son. She had hidden it beneath a loose stone in the wall of the alcove behind the kitchens, her secret sanctuary within the palace walls. She had to go back. It was a dangerous undertaking, returning to the place from which she had been banished, but it was her only chance. Meanwhile, back in the palace, Firuz awoke with a pounding headache, a familiar weakness gripping his limbs. These bouts of illness had become increasingly frequent in recent months, each one leaving him drained and disoriented. He looked across the room at the goblet of water on his bedside table, a faint residue clinging to the inside. A flicker of suspicion crossed his mind. He had noticed Nabila's attentiveness to his health, her insistence on preparing his drinks and meals herself. He had dismissed it as concern, but now a seed of doubt had been planted. He rose from his bed, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked over to the window, gazing out at the bustling city below. He thought of Alia, of her tearful face, her quiet dignity, the unwavering love she held for her child. He thought of Nabila's insistent warnings, her manipulative words, her unwavering certainty that Alia was lying. A strange disquiet settled over him, a growing suspicion that he had been misled. Nabila entered the room, a tray laden with food and drink in her hands. "Your Highness," she said, her voice solicitous, "you must eat something. You look pale. Let me prepare you a tonic. It will restore your strength." Firuz watched her. His eyes narrowed. He noticed the way her hand trembled slightly as she placed the tray on the table, the flicker of unease in her eyes. He declined the food and drink, feigning a lack of appetite. "I need some time alone, Nabila," he said, his voice cool and distant. Nabila hesitated, her brow furrowed. "But your Highness—" "Leave me," Firuz said firmly. Nabila bowed her head and retreated, her footsteps echoing through the silent chamber. Firuz waited until she was gone, then walked over to his desk. He opened a drawer and retrieved a small leather-bound journal, the pages filled with his brother's handwriting. He began to read, searching for clues, for any mention of Alia, for anything that could shed light on the mystery surrounding her child. As darkness fell, Alia crept back into the palace, her heart pounding in her chest. She moved like a shadow, her footsteps silent on the marble floors. She reached the alcove behind the kitchens, her fingers fumbling for the loose stone. She pulled it free, revealing the hidden letter. She clutched it tightly in her hand, a surge of hope coursing through her veins. She had it, the proof. Now, she just had to find a way to get it to Firuz, to convince him of the truth. Firuz, alone in his study, reread the letter he had found amongst his brother's belongings. The tender words, the whispered promises, resonated with a truth he felt deep in his heart. He recalled Alia's quiet strength, the unwavering love she held for her child. He remembered Nabila's insistent warnings, her subtle manipulations, her unwavering certainty that Alia was lying. A disquiet settled over him, a growing suspicion that he had been deceived. He decided to investigate Nabila. He began by questioning the palace staff, discreetly inquiring about her daily routines, her habits, her relationships within the court. He learned that Nabila spent an unusual amount of time with the royal apothecary, often visiting his chambers late at night. This struck Firuz as odd. Nabila had always shown little interest in medicine or the workings of the apothecary's shop. Firuz summoned the royal apothecary to his private chambers. The old man, his hands trembling slightly, bowed low before the prince. "You summoned me, your highness?" he asked, his voice quavering. Firuz, his voice calm but firm, questioned the apothecary about Nabila's visits. The apothecary hesitated, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "Governess Nabila, she often requests certain herbs and tinctures," he stammered. "What kind of herbs and tinctures?" Firuz pressed. The apothecary's hesitation deepened. "Herbs for sleep, your highness. Tinctures for calming the nerves." Firuz noticed the beads of sweat forming on the apothecary's brow, the tremor in his voice. He pressed further, his questions becoming more pointed. "Have you ever provided Governess Nabila with anything unusual? Anything that could affect one's health?" The apothecary's face paled. He looked down at his trembling hands, his silence speaking volumes. Firuz knew then that his suspicions were correct. Nabila had been poisoning him, slowly weakening him, making him susceptible to her manipulations. He dismissed the apothecary, his mind racing. He recalled his recent bouts of illness, the unexplained weakness, the lingering headaches. He remembered Nabila's insistence on preparing his drinks and meals, her solicitous concern for his health. It all made sense now. She had been poisoning him, slowly eroding his strength, making him reliant on her guidance, her counsel. He paced his study, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Nabila's strict adherence to palace rules, her unwavering disapproval of Alia, her insistence on banishing the child, it was all part of a larger scheme, a plan to maintain her control over him, to secure her position within the royal court. He realized that he had been a fool, blinded by his own naivety, by his trust in the woman who had been his tutor since childhood. He had allowed her to manipulate him, to cloud his judgment, to betray the very principles he held dear. A wave of anger surged through him, a burning rage at the betrayal, at the injustice that had been perpetrated against Alia and her child. He knew he had to act, to expose Nabila's treachery, to restore order and justice to his kingdom. But how? The question weighed heavily on his mind, a challenge he now felt determined to overcome. He would not rest until the truth was revealed, until Alia and her child were safe, until Nabila's deceit was brought to light. Alia, clutching the late Crown Prince's letter, found Firuz in the palace library, surrounded by stacks of ancient texts. He looked up as she approached, his face etched with weariness. He gestured for her to sit, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Your Highness," Alia began, her voice trembling slightly, "I have something to show you, something you must see." She held out the letter, her hand shaking. Firuz took it, his brow furrowed. He recognized his brother's handwriting immediately. He unfolded the letter carefully, his eyes scanning the words. As he read, his face paled, his expression hardening with each passing line. The letter began as a love letter, filled with tender words and promises of a future together. But as Firuz continued reading, the tone shifted, becoming more urgent, more desperate. The Crown Prince wrote of a growing fear, a suspicion that someone within the palace was plotting against him. He spoke of unexplained illnesses, of a creeping weakness that sapped his strength. He named Nabila, his own governess, as the source of his suspicion. He wrote of a slow-acting poison, undetectable, insidious, designed to weaken him gradually, to make him reliant on her counsel. The letter ended with a plea to Firuz, a desperate request to protect Alia and their unborn child. He named Alia as the guardian of his posthumous son, begging Firuz to ensure their safety, to shield them from the machinations of the court. Firuz finished reading, his hand tightening around the letter. He looked up at Alia, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. This is, he stammered, his voice choked with emotion. "It is the truth, Your Highness," Alia said quietly. "Nabila has been poisoning you. She has been manipulating you, using your kindness, your naivety, to her own advantage." Firuz looked down at the letter again, the words burning into his memory. He recalled his own recent illnesses, the unexplained weakness, the lingering headaches. He remembered Nabila's attentiveness to his health, her insistence on preparing his drinks and meals herself. It all made sense now. She had been poisoning him, slowly weakening him, making him susceptible to her manipulations. He looked up at Alia, his gaze filled with a newfound respect. "You were right all along," he said, his voice heavy with regret. I was a fool to doubt you." Alia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Your Highness," she whispered, "you must be careful. Nabila is dangerous. She will stop at nothing to maintain her control." Firuz rose from his chair, his movements now purposeful and resolute. "I understand," he said, his voice firm. "Thank you, Alia. You have saved my life. And you have given me back my brother's truth." He looked down at the baby sleeping peacefully in Alia's arms, the dragon-shaped birthmark clearly visible on his tiny foot. He knew what he had to do. He had to expose Nabila's treachery, to protect Alia and her child, to restore justice and order to his kingdom. The time for doubt and indecision was over. The time for action had come. Firuz, his mind sharp and clear for the first time in months, began to methodically dismantle Nabila's web of deceit. He summoned his most trusted advisor, a wise old man named Omar, who had served his father before him. He showed Omar the letter, explaining Nabila's treachery and his own unwitting complicity. Omar, his face grave, listened intently. "Your Highness," he said, his voice low, "this is a grave matter. We must proceed with caution. Nabila has powerful allies within the court. We need to gather evidence to secure our position before we make any accusations." Firuz agreed. He instructed Omar to discreetly question the palace staff, to gather information about Nabila's activities, her relationships, her movements within the palace. He also summoned the royal physician, a man known for his integrity and his loyalty to the crown. He instructed the physician to examine him to confirm the presence of poison in his system. While Omar and the physician carried out their investigations, Firuz began to reach out to other members of the court, to those he knew he could trust. He spoke with his uncle, a powerful general in the royal army, and with several influential nobles who had always shown him respect and loyalty. He explained the situation, carefully laying out the evidence he had gathered, emphasizing the threat Nabila posed to the stability of the kingdom. He found that many within the court had grown suspicious of Nabila's increasing influence over him, her strict adherence to palace rules, her harsh treatment of the staff. They had sensed something amiss, but they had lacked the evidence, the courage to speak out. Now with Firuz's leadership, they rallied to his side, pledging their support, their loyalty, their willingness to help him expose Nabila's treachery. Within days, Firuz had amassed a formidable alliance, a network of loyal supporters who were ready to stand with him against Nabila. Omar returned with a wealth of information about Nabila's activities. He had discovered that she had been secretly meeting with several disgruntled nobles, men who had been passed over for positions of power, men who harbored resentment towards Firuz and his family. He had also learned that Nabila had been embezzling funds from the royal treasury, using the money to buy the loyalty of key members of the palace staff. The royal physician confirmed Firuz's suspicions, finding traces of a slow-acting poison in his system. He explained that the poison, while not immediately lethal, was designed to gradually weaken the body, to make the victim susceptible to illness and manipulation. Armed with this evidence, Firuz felt confident that he could expose Nabila. He began to formulate a plan, a strategy for confronting her, for bringing her treachery to light. He knew he had to act quickly, decisively, before Nabila could further consolidate her power, before she could inflict any more harm upon him or his kingdom. He called a meeting with his allies, outlining his plan, assigning each of them a specific role to play in the upcoming confrontation. The air in the room was thick with anticipation, with a sense of impending justice. Firuz, his voice firm and resolute, addressed his supporters, his words filled with a newfound strength and determination. "We will expose Nabila's treachery," he declared. "We will restore order to our kingdom, and we will ensure that justice is served." The grand hall of the palace buzzed with anticipation. Noblemen in their finest robes, courtiers in shimmering silks, and even some of the palace servants filled the vast space. Word had spread of a royal assembly, called unexpectedly by Prince Firuz. Whispers rippled through the crowd, speculations swirling like the incense burning in ornate braziers. No one knew the purpose of the gathering, but a sense of unease, a premonition of something significant, hung heavy in the air. Firuz entered the hall, his bearing regal, his face resolute. He walked to the raised dais, his footsteps echoing through the sudden hush. Beside him stood Aliya, holding her child. She looked pale but determined, her eyes fixed on Firuz, a silent understanding passing between them. "Members of the court," Firuz began, his voice clear and strong, "I have called you here today to address a matter of grave importance, a matter that threatens the very foundation of our kingdom." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. "Treachery has festered within these very walls, a poison that has slowly seeped into the heart of our royal household. Ugi." He held up the letter he had found amongst his brother's belongings, the faded ink a stark contrast to the crisp white parchment. "This letter," he announced, "written by my late brother, the Crown Prince, reveals a dark secret, a plot that has been unfolding for months, a plot that has nearly cost me my life." He read the letter aloud, his voice resonating through the hall, the words hanging heavy in the air. The assembled court listened in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of disbelief and growing horror. The accusations against Nabila, the respected governess, the trusted advisor, were shocking, almost unbelievable. When he finished reading, Firuz turned to Nabila, who stood rigid, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Governess Nabila," he said, his voice cold and accusing, "do you deny the accusations laid out in this letter?" Nabila lifted her head, her gaze meeting Firuz's. A flicker of defiance crossed her face. "Your Highness," she said, her voice steady, "this letter is a forgery, a fabrication designed to discredit me, to undermine my authority." She turned to address the court, her voice rising with practiced eloquence. "Do not be swayed by this charade. The prince, weakened by illness, has been manipulated by this servant girl. She has spun a web of lies, preying on his compassion, twisting his judgment. She seeks to elevate herself, to gain power and influence through deceit and manipulation." She pointed at Aliya, her voice dripping with scorn. "Look at her. A common servant girl claiming to have borne the child of the crown prince, a preposterous lie. She has fabricated this story, forged this letter to gain your sympathy, to manipulate your emotions." She turned back to Firuz, her voice softening, laced with feigned concern. "Your Highness, I implore you, do not let yourself be deceived. This girl is a danger to the kingdom, a threat to the stability of the throne. Banish her, as is your duty, as is the law. Do not allow her lies to destroy everything your ancestors have built." A murmur rippled through the crowd, Nabila's words planting seeds of doubt in the minds of some. They looked at Aliya, at the child she held in her arms, their expressions shifting from sympathy to suspicion. Firuz, however, remained steadfast. He held up a small vial, the liquid inside shimmering in the light. "This," he announced, his voice ringing with authority, "is the proof. The royal physician has confirmed the presence of poison in my system, the same poison described in my brother's letter, the same poison that Governess Nabila has been administering to me for months." He turned to Nabila, his gaze unwavering. "The truth is out, Nabila. Your treachery is exposed. You have betrayed my trust, you have endangered my life, and you have attempted to undermine the very foundation of our kingdom." A hush fell over the grand hall. All eyes were on Nabila, her face now ashen, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, only the crackling of the braziers and the soft breaths of the assembled court filled the silence. Then Alia stepped forward, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension. "The Crown Prince loved me," she said, her gaze unwavering. "He promised to marry me. He gave me this locket with his portrait inside." She held up the silver locket, the miniature portrait of the late Crown Prince gleaming in the light. "We met in secret, in the rose garden, under the jasmine vines." He spoke of a future together, a future where love and kindness would rule, not duty and tradition. Tears streamed down Alia's face, but her voice remained strong. "He confided in me his fears, his suspicions about Nabila. He told me of the unexplained illnesses, the growing weakness. He gave me this letter, begging me to protect our child, to reveal the truth if anything should happen to him." She looked directly at Nabila, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. "You stole our future, Nabila. You poisoned him slowly, insidiously, to maintain your grip on power. You tried to silence me, to banish me and my son, to erase us from history. But you will not succeed. The truth is out." Alia's words, spoken with such conviction, such raw emotion, resonated through the hall. The assembled court, moved by her testimony, by the undeniable love she held for her child, began to murmur amongst themselves. The seeds of doubt that Nabila had sown began to wither, replaced by a growing belief in Alia's story. Firuz, seeing the shift in the court's sentiment, stepped forward again. "The evidence is clear," he declared, his voice ringing with authority. "Nabila has betrayed us all. She has poisoned me, she has conspired against the crown, and she has attempted to silence those who spoke the truth." He gestured to the royal guards. "Arrest her." The guards, their faces grim, stepped forward and seized Nabila. She struggled briefly, her face contorted with rage, but they held her firm. As they led her away, her defiant gaze met Alia's. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a final confrontation in a battle that had been waged in the shadows for far too long. A collective sigh of relief swept through the grand hall. The tension that had gripped the court for months finally broke, replaced by a sense of hope, a belief that justice had finally been served. Firuz looked at Alia, her face streaked with tears, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. He knew that much work remained to be done, to heal the wounds that Nabila's treachery had inflicted upon his kingdom. But in that moment, as he looked at Alia and her child, he felt a surge of optimism, a renewed faith in the power of truth and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The following day, a formal decree was issued, stripping Nabila of her position and banishing her from Zerzura forever. She was escorted to the border under heavy guard, her face a mask of bitterness and defeat. The news of her exile spread quickly through the kingdom, met with a mixture of shock and quiet satisfaction. The people of Zerzura, weary of her harsh rule and constant criticism, felt a collective sense of relief, a lifting of the oppressive atmosphere that had permeated the court for so long. In the grand hall, before the assembled court, Firuz formally acknowledged the infant as his nephew, the rightful heir to the throne. He spoke of his brother's love for Alia, of the secret promises they had made, of the tragic circumstances that had prevented their union. He held the baby aloft, his tiny face framed against the rich fabric of Firuz's robe. "This child," he declared, his voice filled with emotion, "is the son of my beloved brother, the late Crown Prince. He is a prince of this realm, and he shall be raised with the love and respect he deserves." A wave of murmurs swept through the hall, followed by a resounding cheer. The courtiers, relieved that the uncertainty surrounding the child's parentage had finally been resolved, expressed their approval, their loyalty to the young prince, and to Firuz, their wise and just ruler. Firuz then addressed Alia, who stood beside him, her face radiant, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Alia," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "you have shown unwavering loyalty to my family, even in the face of adversity. You have protected my nephew with courage and devotion. In recognition of your service, and in honor of my brother's love for you, I appoint you as the child's governess." He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of respect and gratitude. "You will raise him within these walls, surrounded by love and security. You will guide him, teach him, and prepare him for the day he will assume his rightful place upon the throne." Alia, overcome with emotion, bowed her head. "Thank you, Your Highness," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "I will not fail you." The court erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the grand hall. Alia, once a humble servant, now stood elevated, her status secured, her future intertwined with the destiny of the kingdom. She looked down at her son, his tiny hand grasping her finger, his peaceful face a symbol of hope, a promise of a brighter future for them both. The whispers of the past, the shadows of doubt and fear finally receded, replaced by the warm light of acceptance, of belonging, of a newfound sense of purpose and belonging within the royal household. Years passed. The young prince, named Kadir after his grandfather, grew strong and healthy under Alia's loving care. She proved to be a wise and patient governess, nurturing Kadir's intelligence and fostering his kind heart. She taught him the importance of justice and compassion, instilling in him the same values that had guided his father and uncle. Firuz watched Alia with growing admiration. He saw the way she interacted with Kadir, the gentle firmness of her discipline, the boundless love that shone in her eyes. He saw the respect she commanded from the palace staff, the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, the unwavering loyalty she had shown to his family. He often sought her counsel on matters of state, valuing her wisdom and her unique perspective. He found himself drawn to her quiet strength, her gentle nature, the unwavering compassion she showed to everyone, from the highest-ranking noble to the humblest servant. Alia, in turn, found herself drawn to Firuz's integrity, his unwavering commitment to justice, his genuine desire to do what was best for his people. She saw beyond the formality of his position, beyond the weight of the crown, to the kind and compassionate man beneath. Their shared responsibility for Kadir, their mutual respect and admiration, gradually blossomed into a deep and abiding love. They spent hours together, discussing Kadir's education, debating matters of state, sharing quiet moments of laughter and companionship. The palace, once a place of secrets and shadows, became a home filled with warmth and laughter, a sanctuary where their love could flourish. One evening, as the sun set over the city of Zazura, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Firuz took Alia's hand. "Alia," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I love you. I have loved you for a long time. Will you be my wife?" Alia's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, Your Highness," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I will. Their wedding was a joyous occasion, a celebration that brought together the entire kingdom. The grand hall of the palace was transformed into a wonderland of flowers and lights, the air filled with music and laughter. Noblemen and servants alike mingled freely, sharing in the joy of the occasion. Kadir, now a bright and inquisitive young boy, stood beside them, his small hand clasped in theirs, his face beaming with happiness. As Firuz and Aliya exchanged vows, a sense of hope permeated the hall, a belief that a new era had dawned upon Zerzura, an era of kindness, justice, and love. The whispers of the past, the shadows of doubt and fear, were finally banished, replaced by the bright light of a shared future, a future where a servant girl and a prince, united by love and a shared commitment to justice, would rule together, ushering in a golden age for the kingdom of Zerzura.